Right at the start of Wagner's second ring opera, The Valkyrie, there's a huge storm raging. The music of the storm carries with it some of the thunder and lightning music that ended the Rheingold. So, although the two works play on separate nights, they're bridged together through the music. But there's more than that, because as the storm rides in, these very first notes provide the first half of the theme for Wotan's spear, his symbol of trust and fair play. Here's the storm. And here's Wotan's spear theme. It's important that this half-finished spear theme opens because it reminds us that in the Rheingold, Wotan, only half the god he once was, has betrayed his contract and dishonoured the gods by stealing Alberich's ring to pay off the giants. So now he lives under the threat of Alberich's curse. But much has happened since the end of the Rheingold and the opening of the Valkyrie. In an effort to keep the gods safe and powerful, Wotan has fathered a race of warrior women, the Valkyries, keepers of the skies, and a crack security guard for the gods, in case they need a little muscle. The Valkyrie's mission is to gather the dead heroes from all battlefields and carry them off to Valhalla, where they can be recycled and sent out on mighty steeds to join Wotan's palace guard. This is Wotan's musical show of force, and what a show it is. No wonder it became Wagner's greatest hit. Stealing Alberich's ring brought not just security problems for Wotan, but a heavy dose of guilt too. The ring, you remember, comes from gold that rightfully belonged to the Rhine maidens, the guardians of the world's treasure. So, to make amends, in addition to his race of warriors, Wotan fathered one special human being from a family called Welsung, wild ones, living in the forest. Through this unique Welsung youth, Wotan thinks he can create a powerful warrior. He intends to do this through a magic sword that he's left embedded in a tree trunk for his son to find. Then his son's destiny will be to seek out the ring and restore the gold to the sorrowing daughters of the Rhine. The youth's name is Siegmund, the first human being we see in the ring, desperately sheltering from the storm as the curtain goes up.
Weshalb dies auch sei, hier muss ich rasten.
Between the Rheingold and the Valkyrie, there's been another huge change, one that's happened in the music. It has stopped sounding godlike or dwarf-like or giant-like or even just scenic-like. It has now become human music. It's a new expressive music. It doesn't want to tell you just the story and present the elements and the characters. This music wants to be much more emotional, to draw you in by acting out in sound the drama that you see on stage. What you take in through your eyes will also be embodied and enacted by the new music that Wagner created for the Valkyrie. See how Wagner lays out the scene. That's the sorrowful theme of Siegmund the Welsung, who sometimes calls himself wehful, woeful, because wherever he goes, he seems to be dogged by trouble. His theme is full of anguish, and it's always dragged downwards at the start. It does manage to pull itself up again by the end, but the gap between the low note and the top note is full of discord. But this upward bit is important because it's going to be completed by Sieglinde, who discovers Siegmund in her house. Her fearful, questioning theme is actually founded on his notes. Can you see too how his down-up theme is completed by her up-down theme? It's as though they're two halves of the one personality, as indeed they are, since we learned later that they are twins. Gradually, the two themes fuse and coalesce into a love theme. All of this magnificently sounded out by a solo cello. The effect is so hauntingly beautiful that it tells you, even if you had your eyes shut, that these two people have done that intensely human thing that Wagner wanted to place at the center of his opera. Siegmund and Sieglinde, two hapless human beings, have fallen in love. And in its new human character, the music seems to have fallen in love too. Instead of just telling the tale, the music has become the tale.
The Ring Cycle is full of so many magical music moments. As an audience member, you can sit and let the music and what's going on completely overwhelm you. It doesn't make any difference. As a performer, you've always got to know that if you let something overwhelm you a little bit and you get a bit caught up in it, you've got to be able to get yourself back on track for the game plan of getting to the end of the opera without some sort of vocal crisis or collapsing in a heap of sobbing tears on the floor. So you've got to find a way to let those magic moments drive the performance to reach out to the audience.
One reason why we're seized immediately by this love music is because we've heard it before. In the Rheingold, one of the gods is Freya, the goddess of beauty. When she appears, the music's in two parts. First, the raising up of this vision of loveliness. And the second part becomes an urgent, speeding fragment born out of her need to escape from the giants who pursue her. In the Valkyrie, it's the second part that becomes the main love theme, and the reason why we immediately associate the theme with the loveliness of falling in love is because Wagner has planted the idea in our minds already through this music for Freya, the goddess of beauty. Listen to how it happens. Here's Freya's escape music from the Rheingold. And here's the love theme from the Valkyrie. With this music, love breaks out among the humans, and Wotan's careful plans go completely off the rails.
In der Stille wischen den Wandel
But let's switch over to Wagner now, because one of the reasons why the music in this opera is so emotionally tingling is because while he was writing it, Wagner, like Siegmund, had actually fallen in love, and not with his wife Minna at all. It happened in Switzerland, here, where, like Siegmund, Wagner had taken refuge from a storm after participating as a revolutionary in the failed May uprising in Dresden. Wagner had been forced to flee Germany. He settled in Zurich here and quickly became a mover and a shaker in the city's musical life. One of the chief patrons of the arts was a wealthy silk merchant, Otto Wesendonck. He was the man who was responsible for the building of this magnificent villa that you see behind me. He lived in Zurich with his beautiful wife Matilda. Matilda took a very eager interest in the new composer who'd just arrived, and especially in his project for The Ring, which by the end of 1852 he'd finally finished. Well, the words at least. All he had to do now was compose the music. But you know, once he started that, it went very quickly. In fact, the music for the whole of the Rheingold was completed in just 18 months. And Wagner turned straight away to the Valkyrie. By this time, though, he and Matilda had become completely infatuated with each other, and he scattered coded love messages throughout the score. Like this one. GSM at the top meant Gesegnet sei Matilda, blessed by Matilda. Another one, ILDGR, stood for Ich liebe dich grenzenlos, I love thee boundlessly. One of the ones I like particularly is LDM, capital M, Liebst du mich, Matilda. Listen to how well the love theme fits those words. Matilda. It's almost as though the words and the music were written for each other. And you know what? I think they were. Here we are sitting in the site of what used to be Der Asyl, which is where Richard and Minna both lived. I mean, this is a completely different house and garden now, but this is the real place, wasn't it?
That's the real place, yeah, you're right. So, but we have an early photograph and drawings of this old building, which Wagner stayed. It looked the same, more or less. He called it the asylum.
Yeah. The advantage of it was not just that he had peace and quiet, and he did, lovely surroundings, but also just across the way was the Wesendonck villa, and he could visit Matilda almost whenever he liked.
Although they lived very close, in addition to that, they sent letters to each other quite often. So we know then sometimes he says, oh, I would love to see you on your balcony, so you just could look over. So I think, although they were living in separate buildings, they were quite close.
Wagner even wrote Matilda a sonata for her to play on the piano. And while she was playing it, we can be pretty sure we know who she was thinking of. What's more, at the top, Wagner wrote a suggestive little question, Wisst ihr, was ihr wird? Do you know what might happen? Which is a direct quote from later in The Ring. So, with a bit of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Wagner was asking her whether there might have been the slightest hope of a lasting love between the two of them. In the Valkyrie, when Siegmund sings to Sieglinde the famous spring song celebrating the blossoming of their love, both Wagner and Matilda would have known inside that it was their love duet too.
Winterstürme wischen der warme Mond, im milden Licht leuchtet der Land. Auf Linden liebten leicht und lieblich, Wunderweben es sich wicht.
There were two important concerts while Wagner was stayed here. One was the 28th birthday of Mathilde Wesendonck. It was on the 23rd December of 57. So Otto Wesendonck was in New York. He had to do some business during Christmas time, but Wagner wanted to present her music, and he composed a little piece of music. In the morning at 7 o'clock, he was over there at the main building at the Villa Wesendonck and conducted a small orchestra of seven musicians and played a little piece of music, which was later one of the Wesendonck songs, Träume, Dreams.
But deep down, Wagner knew that, like the love between Siegmund and Sieglinde, his love for Matilda was doomed even before it had fully blossomed. That's why her piano sonata begins with a tune that is almost the same tune with which, in the Valkyrie, Siegmund is greeted by the announcement of his death.
What he really did in Zurich, and everybody was so fascinated. Before he arrived in Zurich, it still was a small town, but the music life in Zurich was almost
not
not
very
existent.
much, no.
But when he arrived, he really
Brought it to life.
brought it alive,
Ah,
and
wonderful, yes.
he put together the best musicians he could find. Although he thought, it would have been better, in London or in Paris, it would have been much easier. But still, he tried his best, and people were amazed.
The doom of Wagner's love came about in April 1858, when his wife Minna intercepted a love letter and made an enormous scene. Later, despite all his passionate feelings, Wagner drew the infatuation to a close and turned his back on Zurich, but echoes of that love followed Wagner for the rest of his life. We don't know whether Wagner and Matilda actually made love or not. Probably not, given Matilda's deeply ingrained loyalty to her husband and family. But we do know that Siegmund and Sieglinde made love, because later in time, in Act 2 of the opera, we learn that Sieglinde is now carrying his child, and that both she and Siegmund are fleeing from her husband, Hunding, out for revenge and catching up. By this time, Siegmund has seized the sword that Wotan had embedded in the tree for him. He doesn't know that Wotan left it for him, but Sieglinde has told him that it will protect him in battle. Armed with this sword, he prepares to meet Hunding, but just then, Brunhilde arrives. Brunhilde? We haven't mentioned her before. No, but we should, because she's Wotan's favourite daughter of the 9 Valkyrie. Wagner gives Brunhilde that wonderful hoyo-to-ho cry that became so famous and is based on what musicians call an augmented chord. It's unforgettable in its effect, and it makes war on the other chords around it because it doesn't really fit a proper key. It's a chord of strife, just as Brunhilde, as the warrior arm of Wotan, seeks heroes from strife-torn battlefields. Brunhilde uses this chord at the start of Act 2 to launch herself into the opera with heroic shooting star musical phrases that only a daughter of Wotan could sing. Poor old Brunhilde, as soon as she bounds onto the stage, she's in with these big, huge top Bs and runs and trills. What do? Do you run round racetracks for hours?
Because she has to sing so much, no, you have to save your energy. But the secret is warm up, know your voice is working, and then leave it alone.
Wotan wants Brunhilde to ensure that Siegmund escapes unharmed from the fight with Hunding. But Wotan's wife, Fricka, arrives to talk him to his senses. Siegmund, she says, must die, so that the sanctity of love and marriage, home and family may be upheld, which after all is the god's duty. For this, Wagner gives us some of the stateliest music in the Ring. Here is Merlin again, quick change, this time into Fricka.
Deine ewigen Gotten, heilige Ehre, beschirme heut ihr Schild. Von Menschen verlacht, verlustigt in Macht, gingen wir Götter zugrund. Würde heut nicht ehret herrlich mein Recht, gerecht von der mutigen Maid.
Do you think Wagner understood women's voices?
I think so, yes. If you look at the Valkyrie, for example, you've got a range of female voices that are set to sing in ensemble, and the end result is absolute sheer magic.
You mean all these Valkyrie together?
All the Valkyries together. Same with the Flower Maidens in Parsifal. You know, you've got these layers of colours that he thinks from the bottom up. And so provided it's cast the right way, so you get these contrasts of colour, again, working from the bottom right up to the very top, you just get magic.
Fricka makes Wotan swear an oath that he will leave Siegmund to his death. Hating every word, Wotan agrees. To show how final it all is, Wagner actually writes a perfect cadence, a musical full stop, one of only a handful in the whole of the Ring.
Nimm den Eid.
Victorious, Fricka leaves the stage grandly, past the waiting Brunhilde, and tells her that it's all been decided now, to which Wagner allows himself just one more perfect cadence. Now Wotan has to go back on yet another of his promises and remove the magic power from Siegmund's sword. In a long, self-pitying monologue, Wotan recalls to himself, and of course to Brunhilde, now just an onlooker, how this awful state of affairs has come about, and how he must now await the end of the gods and the world he knows. It's a great way, too, of getting the audience to remember what's been happening and to run all the themes by them one more time. A new theme appears, though, in Wotan's monologue, and as usual, it's made up from the spear theme, and it's now played in the lower, darker colours of the orchestra, and it keeps twisting around itself as though it's being caught as in a trap, which is exactly the position that Wotan finds himself in. Brunhilde goes off to do as she's been told. She greets Siegmund, and like a good Valkyrie, she announces his death and bids him be prepared for this and for paradise thereafter. But when she tells Siegmund that he can't take Sieglinde with him, he prepares to kill her and himself with the one sword stroke. Amazed at the power of this human love, of which she knew nothing, Brunhilde stops him and decides to defy Wotan and restore the magic power to the sword in the fight with Hunding. But Wotan arrives just at the fateful moment and shatters the sword blade on his own spear. Hunding immediately kills Siegmund. Wotan, by a single word, kills Hunding. Then, after some minutes mourning over his son's death, he sets off in furious pursuit of Brunhilde, who has taken flight, with both Sieglinde and the broken sword in her possession. Unable to contain its excitement, the orchestra closes the act with just about everyone playing fortissimo, all of them riding furiously through the skies with Wotan. What a way to end an act! So Act 3 rolls into the famous ride of the Valkyrie. Brunhilde catches up with her 8 Valkyrie sisters, who are terrified by what she's done, and they quail at seeing Wotan storming close. To save the son in her womb, Sieglinde leaves for a remote part of the forest, but not before she's left the greatest musical prophecy in the whole world of opera. Brunhilde tells her she's carrying a world hero in her body, and in advance she christens him Siegfried, freedom and joy. Ecstatic, Sieglinde sings her own musical theme of freedom and joy, a theme that we won't hear again until the very end of the Ring, when the gold has gone back to the Rhine maidens and the old world of the gods has passed away to become a new world. It's a theme of bliss, of hope, and of renewal. We don't see Sieglinde again. For us, her love story is finished, but a new love story has taken over. Not a boy-girl love story, but a father-daughter love story. And it's not a love story of rapture this time, but a love story of renunciation in the face of the inevitable. A bit like Wagner's own love story of renunciation in the face of Matilda's loyalty to her husband and family. But here, the immense musical power of the opera begins to take us over in an ever stronger way. To begin with, Wotan vents his fury on Brunhilde for her unthinkable disobedience, but after a bit, she asks shyly whether what she did was not really what he had wanted. Listen to the music. It's unbelievable how Wagner does this. He lets Brunhilde take Wotan's commanding spear theme, and he turns it against itself as though Brunhilde were revealing a different shape from the same notes, the shape of what his will deep down really was. Instead of just going down stepwise, she uses these notes and turns back up there. And again. All these notes should go down stepwise, but she's turning them up and showing that what she really did was his will, even though he pretended not to see it.
War es so schmücklich, was ich verbrach, dass mein Verbrechen so schmücklich du bestrafst. War es so niedrig, was ich dir tat, dass du so tief mir Erniedrigung schaffst.
This theme is to become one of the main strands in the musical texture of Wagner's famous, utterly inspired half-hour ending to the Valkyrie, and it sweeps in magnificently like this. This ending, then, universally known as Wotan's Farewell, makes up a final half hour that becomes almost a shop window of Wagner's new, passionately human musical language for the Valkyrie. Three of Wagner's most obvious new musical inventions appear in this farewell. First, he invented a new kind of mixture of opera and symphony. He'd given up writing symphonies early on in his life, but for the Valkyrie, he invented a way of developing his themes in the orchestra so that his music moved away from ordinary accompaniment to become instead the musical embroidery of a whole symphonic tapestry set out in large-scale sections. Sometimes the singer's voice just drops away and the orchestra takes over, rising to full flight. Then the singer's voice returns, bringing back the story, on which, decorated above and below, are the interweaving orchestral strands. In Wotan's Farewell, that's what happens. Wotan announces the future arrival of the hero Siegfried, and then he stops singing to let the orchestra adorn the scene with an orchestral symphony that paints a picture in sound of what's at stake: love, renunciation, parting, and sorrow. Then the voice takes up again. Storytelling voice, orchestra. Storytelling voice again.
Den einen o frei die Braut, der Freie als ich, der Gott. Der Augen leuchtendes Paar, den oft ich lächelnd gekosst.
This is undoubtedly the most beautiful moment in the Ring. And if it's sung well, and if it's not only sung loud, which is a key for me for this section, because if this doesn't sound like a lullaby and like something extremely intimate, it loses completely the beauty.
The totality of how that goes together and how that story gets told, it gets me every time, and I'll never miss it. If I'm singing a Ring Cycle, I am backstage listening to that every time without fail.
In the whole of of this scene, Wagner's music becomes completely transforming. Take just one other example, the moment where Wotan strips Brunhilde of her godhood, and by kissing her eyes, he puts her to sleep on a rock before calling up the magic fire. Instead of using the downward scale of his spear, he changes it into a downward chromatic scale, all the semitones. But much more emotional because of the magic chords underneath. Can't you just see Brunhilde's eyes gradually closing over as sleep takes hold of her? But more strikingly still, Wagner invents a new kind of ever-expanding musical texture that's like a musical kaleidoscope, full of changing and interweaving patterns of colour and theme that are not exact repetition, but more like small variations. They become differently shaded threads to the same musical fabric. It's as though Wotan is binding Brunhilde up in a quilt of many colours for her sleep through the next decades. It's Wagner's own version of musical imitation, or counterpoint, which he had begun to learn by studying the music of an earlier genius, J.S. Bach. Again, let's just take one example out of Wotan's Farewell. In one part, this theme becomes signalled out. Now, we know this already because it's the main nature theme that the Rhine maidens sang when they first gave voice in the Rheingold. Wotan's Farewell theme was really their nature theme. And having brought this theme to a second birth, as it were, Wagner uses it like the theme of a symphony, working it out in different forms over and over again, above and below, so that it begins to saturate the texture and builds up the expressive intensity of the musical style. The little scraps of harmonies and melodies ebb and flow together, continually wrapping their little variations around the melody, decorating its chords, sympathizing with it, and continually changing its emotional effect. This, for example, can become this, or like this, or like this. And lastly, Wagner invents a new cadence, a closing progression that's pretty much entirely his. It relies on a long statement of the tonic chord, but it moves sideways to here, and then back again to the tonic chord to close once more. But the two chords carry on their backs a little three-note motive that's now become known as the Destiny motive. That's a name that comes from the first appearance halfway through the Valkyrie, when Brunhilde tells Siegmund of his destiny. And now we hear it like this. For me, the fascination of this little musical scrap is in its link back to Mathilde Wesendonck, the object of Wagner's infatuation during composing of the Valkyrie. Mathilde was not just an obsession then, she also became an obsession for Wagner's future opera, Tristan and Isolde. Mathilde became Isolde. And in the unforgettable opening chords of that opera, the destiny chords of the Valkyrie are slyly embedded. See how Wagner arrived at it from this new cadence for the Valkyrie. He moves to this upward version, and starts with a different note and a different harmony, and we're almost at the opening of Tristan and Isolde, which begins like this. And so Wagner's renunciation of Matilda stands behind Wotan's renunciation of Brunhilde. And this utterly personal involvement was what moved Wagner into writing such amazing music for Wotan's farewell and indeed for the whole of the Valkyrie. Soon after, Wagner was to turn to his next opera, Siegfried, and come back to earth again, with another part of his tale to be told in music. A part where Siegfried, the child of Siegmund and Sieglinde, tries to find his own destiny and to put it into place. Alas, it turned out to be not so easy, either for Siegfried or for Wagner, as we'll find out next time.